This case was reported to Peter Davenport's National UFO Reporting Center. I don't know if anyone followed up on it or anything like that. They typically don't do that. They're not MUFON. So, but I don't know. I just thought it was an interesting case. It was July 1st, 2009. Tonopah, Arizona. Felix Heath, a pseudonym, and his 3 friends, 2 guys and 2 girls, were out in the desert near Palo Verde nuclear power plant, driving those dusty back roads, doing what young people do. They were chatting and enjoying themselves. People in the area had long talked of being chased in their cars by strange objects, so these friends were hoping to see something too. One of the friends, James, had even brought his family's digital video camera. What a thrill, they thought, to be chased by a UFO and maybe get it on video. Little did they realize that somebody was paying attention. Their night of fun would turn to sheer terror. It was around 10:30 p.m. when Heath and the others went off the road behind some mountains. No sooner had they done so when they spotted a bright flashing light off in the distance. As it drew closer, they could make out that it was a very large triangle-shaped object. The sudden reality of the craft bearing down on them caused Heath's girlfriend to freak out. She began crying and screaming at them to turn around and get out of there. Heath and the others didn't listen and continued to drive towards it. They eventually got to within 200 to 300 yards from the light. It was the size of 3 football fields. It was triangular in shape and had windows all around it. According to Heath, the friends sat staring at the object as it hovered in front of them. He noted that it was about 3 stories tall and about 30 feet off the ground. They flashed their lights at the object, and to their surprise, it responded by flashing them back, in the same sequence of flashes. Heath and his friend James somehow did not feel afraid and slowly exited the vehicle. They began walking towards the craft. They could see that there was something in the windows. As they drew closer and closer, they began to make out exactly what that something was. As Heath and James, who was recording everything, drew closer to the craft, it became clear to them that, standing in the window staring back at them, were strange creatures. Some were short with large heads, while others were extremely tall, standing an imposing 7 to 9 feet tall. They were unimaginably tall. Heath claims that he and James were able to judge this by the size of the windows. Some of these windows they could see through, the other windows were dark, but then the dark windows cleared up one by one. And as they went clear, more and more entities appeared on the other side of those windows. It was as if beings were calling other beings to come and look. James remained undeterred and continued to record everything. Heath admits that both friends were absolutely terrified, but also strangely excited at the same time. They continued to walk closer, but eventually the heat from the craft became so intense that they could no longer keep going. Heath couldn't believe what happened next. As Heath watched and James recorded, the strange craft moved down and landed on the ground. A large panel at the bottom of the object opened and 2 entities proceeded to walk out. This was proving too much for the friends to take. The sudden reality that this was happening, that extraterrestrials actually did exist, and that they could very well be taken at any second, hit them like a ton of bricks. The measured excitement they felt suddenly turned to sheer terror. It was a sense of fear that Heath had never felt before or since, especially when he realized that he could not move. Both he and James attempted to scream and run, but they could do neither. They were completely locked in place, unable to move or make a sound. Inside the car, the two girls were going berserk with terror, honking the horn and screaming for them to come back. As much as Heath wanted to call for help, he couldn't. He began to resign himself to the idea that he might not survive this night. The entities moved towards the two frightened friends, getting to within 20 feet of them before stopping. Heath noted that one of them was very thin and tall, about 8 to 9 feet tall, while the other one was about 3 to 4 feet tall. Next, Heath recalled that his feeling of utter terror was suddenly gone. He was now awash in a feeling of serenity, a sense of calmness bordering on bliss. James also felt this same sense of peace. The entities began speaking to them, though their mouths did not move. It was inside their mind. Heath and James could not only hear the being's thoughts, but their own as well, as if they had both been patched into some kind of network, which allowed for nonverbal communication. The beings insisted to the two that they needn't be scared, as they had no intention of harming them. Very much the opposite. Heath got the sense that the beings were just as curious about them as he and James were of the beings. They proceeded to speak to each other, the four of them, for around 15 to 20 minutes. Heath referred to it as a, quote, conversation. The creatures seemed intent on conveying that they were on Earth to help. They desperately wanted humans to understand the seriousness of what awaited them if they did not change their ways. They further intimated that some horrible event was coming soon and that it had to be stopped. Heath could not recall if it was him or James, but one of them asked if the event to come would be similar to what happened on September the 11th. The beings seemed to be aware of the event for which they were referring and told the boys that it would be far bigger. The scope of destruction would be unlike anything seen prior. Heath claims that the beings remained vague on the exact nature of the event, only that it would emerge from the Middle East and it would be something truly catastrophic. Whilst he and James spoke to the beings, Heath suddenly had a revelation. He had been here before. The taller entity picked up on his thoughts and replied to him, noting that, indeed, he had been visited before when he was 6 years old, living with his family in Deming, New Mexico. He reminded Heath that he had been out exploring and hiking in the woods not far from his home when he stumbled upon them. Heath did not recall any of this, but as they talked, the memories flooded back. Before departing, the being showed James a glimpse of the future. It was horrifying. The entities implored them to warn others that the planet was warming and that a wave of disasters, fires, floods, tsunamis, etc., would bring ruin to their planet if they did not change course. Next, the taller entity began to move toward Heath, who was no longer afraid. The creature reached out and grabbed his hand. James similarly felt no fear. The entity told the two boys that they would see them again soon. They reiterated their desire for them to warn others about what was to come, that they needed to work towards, quote, saving our planet. It should be noted that James had not turned off the camera. He was certain that the entire event had been recorded. With that, the beings turned and walked back to their craft. In the blink of an eye, it was gone. When the craft left, both Heath and James felt weak. They slowly made their way back to the car. It was a struggle just to do that. Inside, they found their girlfriends, Jamie and Heather, were more calm. They were no longer crying or freaking out. They merely reached out and hugged them and helped them back inside the vehicle. When Heath attempted to start the car, it would not go. Then, After a few seconds of the friends sitting in the dark, it rumbled to life, seemingly starting on its own. As the friends started to drive away, they could hear the sound of choppers approaching. Suddenly, 3 military helicopters appeared overhead and began shining their lights directly down on the witnesses. Within minutes, black military Hummers showed up and gave chase. The friends attempted to play it off as though they were unaware of their presence, but soon a voice over a loudspeaker ordered them to pull over or risk being shot. The friends did what they were told and immediately pulled off and turned off their car. Military personnel surrounded their vehicle, guns drawn. Heath recalls that in amongst these men, standing out like sore thumbs, were 2 men dressed in black suits. One of these men opened the door and ordered Heath and the others to step out. Heath claims that as he stared at the men in the suits, he began to make out that he actually recognized one of them, but for the life of him he could not remember from where. He was certain that he had met this man before, but he did not know when or where this happened. The 4 friends got out while the men in the suits began asking them questions. The military personnel began conducting a thorough check of the car. Heath noted that they were very matter-of-fact about the nature for the stop, asking point blank if they had any contact with the UFO or its occupants, and if so, for how long. No attempts at hoodwinking them with nonsense claims of swamp gas or secret black projects. These guys were the real deal. One of those we know that you know type situations. They were determined to get to the bottom of what happened. One of the soldiers handed over the video camera, and the footage was immediately reviewed by one of the suited men who confiscated it. They insisted to the 4 that they were never to speak a word of what happened on that night. For some reason, the 2 suited men singled out Heath. He was loaded into one of the Hummers along with James's camera. When the friends asked where they were taking him, they were told not to worry about it. Heath claims that as they drove, he was further questioned about the encounter. For some reason, he could not stop staring at the fellow he was certain that he had met before. It began to annoy him. Who was he? How did he know him? He wondered. After talking to him some more, the men drop Heath off on the I-10 highway near Tonopah Joe's restaurant. He managed to call his friends who drove to the location and picked him up. The witness said that his friend James was recording this event. He had recorded the whole thing as far as he knew. I thought that was interesting because in a lot of these cases, the equipment usually shuts down. Not just the vehicle, but usually anytime somebody tries to pull out a camera or some kind of recording equipment, it just shuts down. So did he really capture the whole thing or part of it? It doesn't really matter, I guess. Whatever they did capture was enough for these guys to want to confiscate it. So I love the way this case kind of unfolded, in that when they did encounter these men in black, or 2 guys in black suits who might very well have been government agents, I don't know, but it's interesting how they kind of approached it. They're not, beating around the bush. They're not pretending like it's something else. They're just like, yeah, did you have contact with the UFO or its occupants? And if you did, how long did it last? I just thought that was interesting.